Welcome everyone to the another episode. Today we have a Heather Sunderland all the way from Arizona, US. So she is a board certified functional health coach with personal journey of her recovering from 28 years of illness due to undiagnosed Lyme disease and mold toxicity. So her mission is in her life right now help and motivate individuals reclaim their health from complex chronic conditions like Lyme disease and also mold toxicity. So autoimmune diseases and chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So obviously she had that for like nearly 3 decades right now, and you know how things goes. Like obviously those of you listening to my podcast, you know, like I have autoimmune disease myself. So when you have this kind of illnesses, like you have to do your own studies and work on yourself. So obviously she done that like the last 3 decades, and we're going to learn every details about it, how she became who she is right now as a health coach and how she helping others. So without further ado, let's get started with this show, and welcome to the show, Heather. So Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, my pleasure. And I'm really excited to learn more about the journey you had, like nearly 3 decades. And obviously, it's never easy. And whatever I can hear from your story is basically it was undiagnosed at the beginning, and obviously, is just like a really, really hard, isn't it? So, walk us through to our listeners today. How did you find out about the illness? And it's like a very unusual illness. I know autoimmune disease, but not the mold toxicity. Like, how does it work? So, if you can briefly share about the journey, like how is all got started and when you started to feel unwell.
Sure. I did not know I was being exposed to mold or water damage in my home as a child, so I had childhood illnesses like asthma and digestive issues and sinus infections. And it wasn't until I was 30 I actually developed daily chronic pain and got lots of labels like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue.
Hmm.
By the time I was 35, I was totally disabled. And I was homebound for about 10 years and just was given lots of labels to what was wrong and right treating with medication the symptoms. It really wasn't until later I just kept getting sicker,
Yeah.
developing neuropathy, severe neuropathy, severe brain fog, digestive issues. My diet got down to about 10 foods and lots of labels. I had about 20 labels of illnesses until a doctor decided to do a blood test for Lyme disease. I lived in Pennsylvania at the time and
Yeah.
I really didn't know a lot about Lyme, but um, I had Lyme bacteria in my body, and I chose, and this is like 22 years out after being
Hmm.
sick, 22 years, I chose to treat holistically with herbs to kill the Lyme. And I
Right.
did improve, um, but I was still sick and I was still disabled, even though like my pain had improved. I still had neuropathy. I still had trouble walking. I had digestive issues. I entered health coaching school very limited. I had struggled to walk, struggled to stand. My vertebrae didn't stay in alignment, very bizarre. And I didn't really get answers from health coaching school, but a colleague of mine reached out. During COVID, I developed Graves' disease, which is hyperthyroidism.
Yeah.
And it was a very dark time because I didn't sleep for about 3 days at a time.
Wow.
And nothing my doctors did, brought down my heart rate or gave me the ability to sleep. And so as a health coach, I did a bunch of research and was doing herbals to help my thyroid.
Hmm.
And then my colleague said, Heather, I think you've been exposed to mold. And I just thought she said, I think you have something called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which for the listeners, it's an illness where the toxic bucket in the body overflows. It's very common in people who have Lyme or who've been exposed to water damage, but it really can happen from any toxic exposure building up in the body, pathogens in the body like parasites, viruses, bacteria, heavy metals, and other toxins. And so I went and got blood work for that, and it showed I had chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is called CIRS for short. And I started working with a doctor to treat, and they were working on healing my gut and pulling out toxins, and
Right.
nothing shifted in 5 months of treatment. Nothing was improved. And I met some other health coaches who had the same illness who were using a regenerative nutrition approach to healing.
Hmm.
And I was down to 10 foods and I got started on this approach. And 3 days in, my diet started to expand and life just started to change. It was gradual. Nothing happened overnight. And it was a process. 3 months out, my brain fog had lifted. 6 months out, I was able to walk without assistive devices because I had like wheelchairs, canes,
Yeah.
portable seats, walkers. It was gradual, but I was really nourishing my body at a cellular level and gently detoxing with food and diet and
Yeah.
working on restoring the gut. Very, very holistic, very, very simple, not super expensive at that point in time, what I was doing. Um, and it was a process. It took about 23 months for my doctor, who didn't help me get well, but she was still my doctor, saying, "You don't have Lyme anymore. You don't have mold toxicity. You don't have SIRS." But my body, I had been on drugs for 20 years for these labels of illnesses, and my body did have a lot that it wanted to release and let go of in terms of toxins and
Hmm.
parasites and things. And so my body has spent the last 2 years just sort of releasing things that don't belong in my body. And I'm really not doing stuff to force that to happen. It's happened an awful lot with creating an internal environment that things cannot thrive in the
Yeah.
body. But I'm no longer sick. I'm working, I'm health coaching people and I attract, mostly those people with SIRS, mold, and Lyme. But a lot of people, I don't know what your autoimmune condition is, water damage and exposure to water damage is something that a lot of the time is unseen and not talked about. And for most people with autoimmune disease, I always say, like, rule out that you're not being exposed to mold or mycotoxins in an apartment or a home because you can't see it. And a lot of times you don't smell it. You can smell it sometimes,
Yeah.
but 70% of the time it's unseen and it's behind a wall. And it makes people very sick and it can affect different people in the same home differently. Like my whole family was sick, but I presented much more classic with the nerve pain than my husband and son, who all were sick as well, but they presented differently and they were functional and able to work. But my husband was like pre-diabetic metabolic syndrome, severe rashes.
Hmm.
My son had severe ulcerative colitis, asthma, and extremely underweight. And he is the only one who chose not to address the root
Yeah.
and stuck with the traditional medical system of just treating his symptoms. So he's still functional but sickly. And, my husband and I have reversed our health conditions, but I'm 59. So I was sick a long time. So the longer you've been sick, it takes a little bit more energy and work to peel away those layers of the onion, to
Yeah.
get to that full health that we want to get to.
Yeah. Wow. So you had a lot of illnesses going on last nearly 30 years, and obviously you had to work on yourself. And did you say how long it's been like undiagnosed, like you had to suffer through the conditions?
I was I was undiagnosed with the Lyme for
Yeah.
22 years. The mold was my entire life. It was only a few years ago I found out about the mold, and I was
Hmm.
exposed ever since I was like 2 years old.
Yeah.
So it was really mold is often the root of sinus infections, asthma,
Yeah.
lung problems. Mold can be the root of, but it can be the root of that. It's a great masquerader of so many illnesses, and almost every doctor is dealing with clients who are chronically ill, and mold is a part of it, right? It's not the only piece, but it can be a huge part. And if somebody's got cancer, any client I've seen with cancer, they were living in mold, and mold will really suppress the immune system. So
Hmm.
it's a big, I don't know, that's my soapbox is to
Yeah.
share about water damage because it gets missed in the traditional world and it often gets even missed in the holistic world unless a practitioner's been through it themselves.
Yeah. So wow, it's like 22 22 years of like no diagnosed the illness you had. So what did you do during that time? Like what's doctor been giving you? Like what they were saying?
I was just told I had, I had fibromyalgia, I had chronic fatigue, I had asthma, I had SIBO, I had interstitial cystitis. So every diagnosis came with a drug, right?
Yeah.
A prescription medication, which learning now that just right added to the toxic burden of my body. So that when I eventually found out what was really wrong, I mean, I had to detox all of that stuff my liver had to process, out of my body. And my livers had to do a lot of work to clean that stuff out. So I was just on tons of medications, fentanyl, Vicodin, Valium, antidepressants, but for pain. Um, and I came off everything. I was on 20 drugs, for over 20 years. I
Mhm.
came off all of it. But if I was going to do it again, I think I would have never started
Yeah.
with the drugs. But at the time, I didn't know. I didn't know there was another option. I didn't know even that there were holistic modalities to deal with pain.
Yeah. So when did you started with the holistic approach? Like when did you know like there is
Um,
alternative?
Probably about ten years ago. I mean, I was dabbling in holistic things. I was going to practitioners who did muscle testing or applied kinesiology. Have you heard of that?
No, no.
Okay. Well,
Can you tell me a little
it's
bit
a
about it?
way of, yeah, it's basically a lot of chiropractors do it and some holistic doctors where they'll like put pressure on your arm looking for a strong or weak response. And they may hold a vial that has Lyme bacteria or something in it.
Mm.
And if they get a strong response, it's saying, hey, that your body's dealing with, hey, this Lyme bacteria or EBV or whatever it is. And so I went to practitioners who would muscle test my different organs and try to support it holistically. And that's what got me off my 20 medications before we even knew that I had Lyme or mold was just supporting my organs. I
Yeah.
actually do muscle testing with clients. I just need to see them. I don't need to be with them in person. You can do it remotely. And it's been an amazing way to assess what's going on with a client because I can ask a question and use my own muscle response to looking at them and ask, do they have parasites in their body and get an idea of, 0 to 10. 10's the highest amount of parasites. And get an idea where they are and get a picture of what's going on in terms of their toxic load, the parasite load, the viral load, the bacterial load, the heavy metal load, the mold load in their body. It's not, I can't use it to diagnose,
Yeah.
but it can give me a really good picture. And if somebody wants testing done to verify stuff, we can do that. And all the testing I've had clients do, it's always verified what I've muscle tested.
Mm.
So it's a holistic, right? It's a
Yeah.
holistic alternative kind of technique. But for me, it's been very, very powerful on my own journey. And it's been very powerful with my clients who are really, really sick because we can muscle test what supplement or what support their body wants or needs and dose it appropriately instead of guessing their liver needs milk thistle. We can muscle test, does their liver need support and what support does it specifically want and at what dose.
Yeah.
And it saves money. It really
Yeah.
does.
So what was your main treatment for both of your diseases? Like what did you do first? Like holistic approach after doing the process you mentioned?
Well, my doctors put me on binders to bind toxins.
Hmm.
They use Cellcore as a company that makes whole food herbs and binders for people with Lyme and mold. But there were a lot of things my doctors missed. Nobody assessed my detox pathways. Our body has lymph, kidneys, liver, gallbladder,
Yeah.
our bowels. They are all part of the pathways that allow our body to get rid of toxins. And people's bodies, when we're sick, usually some or all of those pathways are overburdened. So my doctor, we didn't do any of that. And that was something that I always have to do with clients is I have to assess based on their symptoms. And then I'll use muscle testing just to confer. what pathways need some support or help. And then we will muscle test what might be best for their lymph. Is it movement? Is it dry brushing? Do they need herbs to support the lymph? Do they need a combination of things to support getting the lymph moving? So that was totally missed on me, and that was very, very important. The other piece that was really missed on me was addressing parasites. When you've been sick with Lyme, and everybody's got parasites. I know people don't like to hear it and don't want to like talk about it.
Yeah.
But everybody's got parasites if we're alive. But people who have colitis and chronic infections and autoimmune diseases, they have parasites. And parasites cause inflammation. And they're there for a good reason too. They mop up some of the bad stuff, they mop up heavy metals, but we have to address parasites with people. But you can't just go in and start killing. You really
Yeah.
have to make sure the body is prepared and ready. And those pathways are a first starting place. And like I said, I learned to eat to sort of starve pathogens, including parasites, eating very high alkaline. Everybody's different how high alkaline they need to go. I usually say 80-20. If you can work toward increasing the alkaline foods in your diet to
Mm.
80% and keep those acidic foods like meat, um, processed foods to 20%, but it took me time to get there. And when I got there, I was doing almost 95, 98% alkaline because I was so sick and it was working. My husband never ate the way I did. He didn't get as strict as I did because he wasn't as sick as I was.
Yeah. And how long did it take for like you to start seeing the results of doing that alternative things you've been doing?
Well, I mean, for me, with the regenerative approach, 3 days, my food went from ten foods I could eat to 11. And
Yeah.
every 3 days, my diet was increasing. So I saw changes right away when I was addressing the entire picture, addressing inflammation and toxicity and nourishment.
Mm.
Um, but it was just gradual. Like at 3 months, the brain fog was gone. At 3 months, I was holding chiropractic adjustments. My vertebrae used to go out, and I was at the chiropractor 3 times a week for 8 years. And I didn't understand at the time, but it was that inflammation in my body from the toxins and pathogens that was making it hard for my vertebrae to stay in place. And my doctors were just baffled. 3 months of gently detoxing with food, I never needed to go to a chiropractor again. And it really blew my mind.
Yeah.
And then 6 months is when I stopped using assistive devices. And then after that, it was just gradually seeing, more energy, more ability to do stuff. But I did have symptoms of things leaving the body and detoxing, and that was not always pleasant.
Mm.
I was working the whole time I was healing, so my clients were a great blessing and a great distraction to the symptoms that I was going through.
Yeah. So right now, like obviously you have worked on yourself and you helped your husband as well. Both of you reversed it. So how do you help your clients? Like if someone comes to you, they need the help to have similar kind of
We
situation like
always,
yourself. What is the
yeah,
process?
I mean, I've had no problem helping people. I always like to, if they give me permission to sort of muscle test and assess their toxic loads in their body and pathogen loads, because it gives me a picture of where we need to focus. Of course, we do a full written assessment and paperwork, and hear what they're struggling with and what their goals are and what they want to achieve. But it's always about assessing the environment first,
Mm.
ruling out mold if they're willing to go down that rabbit hole. Some people are like, I can't afford it. And then we have to be honest about what the potential results will be if they don't address things because it's going to hinder healing. And then it's about supporting the body and supporting pathways and bringing down the pathogen load and gently detoxing with food and helping them make sustainable changes in their lifestyle. Part of which is, of course, diet, but it can be other things, right? Like connecting with friends and community,
Yeah.
doing things that brings people joy. But most of the people I work with are like me. They're severely sick and disabled. They're homebound. I love when I get somebody who's not, but I'm attracting those people who have a story that's similar. So
Mm.
if they come to find me, they're usually very motivated because nothing they've done has worked. And they can usually expect to see shifts within the first few weeks, if not the first month. But it is a process. Healing is peeling away layers of the onion, and the body sort of shows us what we need to do next.
Yeah.
But we're working on basic principles like sleep, but it's really each person is individual. No protocol is the concepts are the same, but nobody's on the same protocol because everybody's body is different, but the
Right.
principles are the same.
Yeah. So, if you want to share with our audience, like, what will be like your number one lesson you have learned nearly 3 decades of working through this diseases you had, and obviously going through so many traditional route to right now the alternative route. So, what will be your number one lesson for those who's listening?
Yeah, my number one lesson would be aware of toxicity and how it affects the body. Like, even if you're young and in your 20s or 30s, be thinking about what you put on and in your body. Everything we put on our skincare, hair care gets into the body. So if you look at those ingredients and it's loaded with, ingredients that you don't know what they are, those toxins the body has to process. And when people finally develop an illness, toxicity is at the root of it. So I wish I had understood that. It wasn't taught to me in school, that toxins just play such a huge role, but we have so many choices that we get to make to choose what we put on and in our body food wise. Eating organic, I never understood, why that was beneficial or helpful. I think in the UK, the food quality in terms of chemicals and pesticides is much, much better than the food quality here in the
Mm.
US, where we've added lots of ingredients to our labels. And I was a dietitian before being a health coach. I never thought about those things. I thought, I'm eating healthy, I'm eating fresh food, but I was eating, a sort of a standard American diet, not maybe as bad as most people, but I eat very differently now where everything's fresh. And if I buy something with a label, I know what all the ingredients are in their whole food and there's no additives or chemicals, in the product. I wish I knew those things, years and years ago.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you so much, Heather, for sharing your journey with us in this podcast episode. So we are nearly coming to end of this podcast. So before we wrap up, if anyone wants to learn more about yourself or your business, where's the best place to find you?
The best place to find me is at healthcoachingbyheather.com, and that's my website. And there's a lot of free educational videos on the website, and there is a free mold webinar coming up January 2nd if people want to learn more, even if you're in a different time zone. If you missed the live version of the webinar, you will get the replay.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for your time today and joining with me in this podcast episode. I wish you very best of luck with everything you do and you have wonderful holidays.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you so much for increasing people's awareness through your podcast.
Yeah, that's my very pleasure. And thank you so much for you coming to the show. So that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode with Heather Sunderland. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If anyone wants to reach out to her or learn more about her, you can find her through our website and social media links. I'm going to put them on the description for you to find it. So until then, talk to the next episode. Take care.